Gears up for layoffs. McDonald's now has shut its offices in the US as there are reports that it is going to look at possibly a set of layoffs coming in. So fast food giant McDonald's is the latest. They have temporarily shut its offices in the US this week as it gears up to lay off several employees as part of the restructuring plan amidst the global economic meltdown. According to Wall Street Journal, the Chicago-based burger major has told US employees that they should work from home till they can figure out what they're doing with their layoffs. Now, it's important to look at what's happening in context. McDonald's is just the latest among a number of US giants across sectors that have talked about layoffs. But what's happening in India? Some important data coming up in the last couple of days. For one is the CMIE data, which comes out every month on India's unemployment, and it shows that India's unemployment has risen to a 3-month high in March to 7.8%. as labor markets seem to deteriorate. Apart from this, we have also seen PMI data coming out, which shows that we've seen a contraction in employment for the first time in 13 months. Now, of course, we've had a slew of layoffs as far as startups are concerned. But is there a concern that it can spread? And are we going to see a deeper cut? To speak on this, I'm joined now with Garima Kapoor, Chief Economist from Elara Capital, Sashi Kumar from Indeed with me on the show, and Rituparna Chakraborty, co-founder and ED of TeamLease Services with me on the show. I'm also speaking with Samir Parikh, founder of Naman HR. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us. Rituparna Chakraborty, let me begin with your take. Of course, we're still waiting to understand how many people McDonald's is laying off. Is it part of some sort of a corporate restructuring? So all we have right now is a headline. Why it is a bit jarring is because McDonald's as a fast food chain or a QSR retail giant, if they are feeling recessionary pinch, that seems like real trouble. In the United States, McDonald's or fast food is not a discretionary spend. Why would they be seeing tough times then is the question. How are you looking at the slew of announcements that have been coming up in the last few months and, of course, in this calendar year as well?
Thanks, Tamanna, for having me on the show. I think it continues to be a very unfortunate narrative that's playing through. But I think it's important to understand that these are all the cascading effect. I mean, I was just reading Elon Musk's quote about how San Francisco is looking like a dead city right now. So I think it's just, it's probably his way of telling us about the impact that some of the layoffs have had in the United States. And finally, layoffs means loss of income. Loss of income means somewhere or the other domestic consumption that does get impacted. But of course, McDonald's is almost like staple in the United States. And hence, when we see that even they are kind of cutting back and kind of rationalizing their headcount, I think it's pretty much, it doesn't all go well. So, and I think it's essentially, I mean, one can say that it probably could be a preemptive step. I mean, I don't know the details. It could be caution. It's about, one doesn't know whether they're trying to focus more on the digital consumptions by any means. One doesn't know, but I can tell you that there is definitely, the outlook has definitely kind of turned a little more apprehensive, and especially around domestic consumption there. And if it happens in the United States, I think slowly and gradually we will start seeing the impact in a larger diaspora as well. So yeah, I think it's essentially, I mean, for me, McDonald's definitely is an indication that domestic consumption is also feeling the heat right now.
And it's a different narrative from what we were seeing in the tech space. Let me bring in Sashi Kumar on this. The narrative when there were layoffs in the tech space was that, look, they front-loaded people during the pandemic in anticipation of huger demand. They hired a lot of people during that time. So if a Meta sacks thousands and thousands of people, you should look at it in perspective of the number they have hired. Now, that story doesn't seem to be just a tech story anymore. You're seeing investment banks, you're seeing retail. Now, if you're seeing that in a McDonald's, what is that telling you?
So it's obviously it's not one reason or one shoe fits all, right? There have been multiple things that have been happening. One is obviously the front loading of people, hiring of people, quite a lot of people during the pandemic. Then there's been inflation, there's been a war, uh, and all of this eats into people's savings and therefore reduces their ability to consume. When tech layoffs happen, tech employees are typically in the upper bracket of pay. So when there were layoffs there, that definitely impacted their ability to spend. And obviously, this will now slowly translate into what's happening within other sectors as well. Though obviously the banking issue is completely different and not linked to the layoffs that we've seen in tech or in some of the other industries.
Let me just get an opening comment over here from Samir Parikh as well. And I'm still focusing on US, I've not come to domestic factors. But is this global recession story looking like it's here to stay for some time? And the fear that these round of layoffs will move on to hitting consumption capabilities even further. People will lose jobs, there will be less income in families, they'll spend less, so on and so forth.
Thanks, Tamanna. I mean, the first part is global issues, especially started from tech sector, is spreading. But then, especially in the domestic market in India, with nearly 55.4 PMI, and PMI, I know that the employment part in PMI is contracted, but then if PMI is above 50, that means, yes, the new orders are taking place, CapEx is taking place. And therefore, we are not really seeing that kind of layoffs in the manufacturing sector. And India is a strong manufacturing economy. So with so much of incentives declared by government, especially the PLI scheme, which is a fairly good success, the production linked incentive, and also Make in India program, we don't hear those many cases of layoffs in manufacturing. I largely agree with you that there was not much of front loading in manufacturing sector, unlike IT, where there were too many such cases. And that could also be helping manufacturing, where they always planned well and they always executed that very well in accordance with their plans. So I really don't see that kind of challenge spreading to India or domestic market, or for that matter, manufacturing economy. Even in US, it is above 50. If you see the manufacturing PMI in US is also 57.9. So I don't see that as a challenge shifting. But yes, the tech sector has definitely been impacted.
Talking about McDonald's today, Samir Parikh, the tech sector story is no longer, one that seems to bear out, that this is only happening in tech, it's not spreading, it doesn't seem to bear out anymore. That's the point. Across industries, we are seeing job cuts. I mean, we can't turn our eyes away from it.
I think, see what happens sector to sector, there is a complete change. Let's say, for example, in manufacturing sector, and I'm again coming back because the whole story that has shifted to India, whether it's cell phone industry or electronics industry.
India yet. Let me make it clear. I've not come to the India bit of the story yet. I'm talking about the United States and the global recession fears. Let's start with that leg and then move on. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in global recession fears. I mean, we have been hearing about these fears since fairly long, isn't it? For last 3-4 months. Have they really spread to manufacturing sector in even globally? I am right now not seeing that. On the contrary, the whole war effect in some of the US industries might be reversed, because the entire defense sector might be even working at a much faster pace than otherwise. So I think this goes sector-wise, even globally when we look at. I'm very, very optimistic, and I must say that I don't see that kind of recession impacting the organizations as it has impacted the tech sector.
But from Garima on, the barrage of job cuts, and as Rituparna described it, quite a distressing narrative that we've been seeing in the last few months. Is this a startup story? Is this a tech story? Is this a demand fear story? What are you seeing play out, especially when you hear about news like McDonald's?
Yeah, I think we'll have to divide this into what exactly is taking place, and then the multiple aspects that are taking place right now. One is the sectors that hired very aggressively during COVID, partly because there was a pent-up demand of a specific requirement, let's say in healthcare, or because real estate housing sector was booming because there was helicopter money in US, also hired at an aggressive pace. Then there was a sector in edtech. EdTech was also hiring very aggressively because those demand was driven by pandemic. Then soon after pandemic ended, there was a sudden splurge of consumer spending in sectors such as QSR, or consumer discretionary, which we also saw happening in India. Now, all that is now beginning to normalize. And also remember, in case of US, we've not seen the pace of hikes that we've seen in this cycle ever since last 30, 40 years. And the US economy is much more levered today than what it was in the previous aggressive rate hike cycles. So we probably have to take all these three factors into account to determine as to why we're seeing that kind of slowdown. Yet, when you look at the tech sector, the quantum of people that they had hired during 3 years of pandemic or 2.5 years of pandemic, and the percentage of people that they are laying off now, a much smaller proportion. To some extent, there was also an aggressive hiring that had taken place, a precautionary hiring that was taking place in US because of the low labor force participation. So there are many sectors that are not laying off people until they saw concrete signs of slowdown, because finding somebody new to replace the existing job was costing an employer much more than replacing. And that's a statistics we've been following. And that partly explains to you why you suddenly saw a barrage of firings and while nothing happened for a very long time. But now that the aggressive rate hike effect is slowly starting to percolate, private equity money has become difficult, levered sectors will find it difficult, discretionary spending is coming off. Naturally, it is becoming more broad based. But I will still keep my view that on a holistic basis, it is not as bad and does not look as yet as recessionary as normal recessions in US have looked in the past.
So we're not, looking at a full-blown recession. Let's come to the India piece of the puzzle right now. And Rituparna, what are we seeing in terms of demand for hiring? We've seen some smatterings of job layoffs, and in the bigger picture, it's obviously not as much as in the US or at an alarming rate in formal jobs. But we are in a stage where we need to focus on the pace of job creation rather than retention of jobs. Have you seen a slowdown there or signs of people or companies postponing hiring decisions?
Sure. But allow me to respond to Samir a little bit about the US. Actually, manufacturing activity has contracted for 4 straight months till the month of Feb. The PMI is at about 47.7. It increased marginally from 47.4. So it's still quite low, dangerously lower than the 50 mark. New orders have definitely started improving, but it's still significantly low. The input cost and input prices have gone up because of the inflationary effect, and also buyer resistance has definitely seems to be quite high. So just to give you a perspective that it's even in manufacturing, all is not great in the United States. But of course, India could be different. Now coming on to India, I think, Tamanna, yes, I don't think a large chunk of layoffs have not happened in India in the recent times. I mean, India has its own share, but I think India's share has been negligibly lower. I wouldn't say negligibly, but I think it's much lower than what we are seeing in the United States. So, however, on ground, there is definitely a semblance of caution that we see. Like Q4 usually is not a great quarter where typically organizations don't go berserk in terms of hiring. This is the quarter of consolidation, planning, budgeting. So we always see, and it's also post-season, we always see a little bit of slowness in hiring. But I do sense and I do see that there is an added caution. And that's probably the reason for that is that organizations have seen the ups and downs in the recent times over the last 3-4 years. And no one wants to it's not that the world has stabilized where you can take risk and chances. So there's absolutely zero anticipatory hiring, or rather wherever you can postpone a decision to hire, organizations are looking at. Where the requirements are absolutely critical, I think focus is on probably fill up few of those positions, niche skill sets are still being hired. So I wouldn't say that. So there are skills around, even in tech, there are certain skills for which organizations are looking for talent, but these are hyper specialized, futuristic skills for which they do need talent. However, I do believe that manufacturing definitely is a silver lining. Manufacturing in India, for manufacturing, it's a great opportunity. When there is a lot of instability, and especially what's happening in China, which is causing a lot of people a lot of concern, we are seeing that people are looking at India as from some kind of a geopolitical stability, as well as their ability to kind of deliver from a manufacturing perspective. So yes, there is definitely an opportunity here for the manufacturing sector. Of course, even India is feeling the pressure of rising prices. Input costs are definitely rising. Some of it is being passed on to the consumers wherever possible. The rising in some of the labor costs are being passed on, which is all true. However, the point is that if a large part of the manufacturing is, of course, dependent on domestic consumption, but also exports. So if there are any kind of headwinds or any kind of challenges that are experienced, so even though there is an opportunity, there is a potential. But I honestly feel that we should stay optimistic because of the way the Indian economy has been structured, which is a lot more resilient and self-reliant. We might be able to kind of see through this phase. So it's a difficult phase, but it's a wait and watch. But my belief is that it's not going to last beyond a couple of quarters in the non-tech sectors. In the tech sector, I continue to believe that you will see the current mood for at least a year, 18 months.
Yeah, also probably comes from the fact that the tech sector is also very sensitive to what happens in the United States. And that blowback will be there. Garima, I want to come back to you on, the Indian economy outlook as far as jobs are concerned. When you're seeing, I mentioned a couple of data points that have come out. Do you find that concerning, or are these more likely to be seasonal shifts as well? Because a lot of our employment is in the informal sector. A lot of it is also dependent on how the rural economy performs.
Tamanna, as you rightly mentioned, one, of course, rural economy has not been really firing guns for a long time now, at least a couple of years since the pandemic normalized. Rural economy has been a bit sluggish. So the absorptive power there is getting certainly compromised. So there is, of course, an excess labor, and that also shows up in employment statistics. On the second hand, we also have in India issues where crypto exchanges or QSR, or e-commerce, or private equity, or probably the so-called segment that was completely fueled by the private equity sector is now slowing down. Now that also reflects into why so many of your new age startups are kind of firing. So if you look at the data points, so basically the startups that are probably are leading the probably layoff sentiment as well as statistics, and the non-startup sector is not laying off as aggressively. Having said that, there are certain silver linings for sure in India's manufacturing sector, as alluded by my other co-panelists. The one, of course, is that if you look at the investment appetite, after a very long time, probably after a decade, India's investment appetite is back. Of course, largely led by government sector, but new project announcements in the manufacturing sector also, when I look at the FY23 data, have grown up by 27% year on year compared to 10% last year, and almost a degrowth before that. So you're really seeing a seismic shift in that of appetite to invest. Now, how is this being fueled? In the manufacturing sector, you have one, of course, the fact that certain sectors like textiles are not just gaining from China plus one, but also probably gaining from Pakistan plus one or Sri Lanka plus one. Second, you have sectors where government is putting a lot of policy support, for example, PLI-driven sectors such as electronics or chemicals. And then third is probably the government's own capex appetite, which basically in railways, defense, roads, or data centers, which is again fueling a decent amount of appetite for the private sector. So I think that partly explains why do you have a dichotomy where the manufacturing headline number, including the PMI, continues to do well, where and probably the horizon for order inflow is also positive, whereas there is a significant amount of negative news that is building in terms of layoffs, particularly in the new age, edtech, startup, or the crypto-related sectors.
So interesting perspective. Thank you, actually, Garima, for laying out that dichotomy we're seeing right now. Sashi Kumar, your take on the Indian employment outlook, and it's frankly something which is changing every few months. I've been talking about this in the last 6 months, and honestly every 2 months there is either one set of reports or people who are saying it's going great guns, we're going to see good hikes, good appetite, and then another set of data which says quite the opposite. Let's start with the propensity to hire and the eagerness to hire, the jobs out there. What are you seeing on that sense?
A brave person to make a projection of how the job market is going to be over the next 12 months to 24 months. But I'll take a shot. Right now, like everybody said, manufacturing seems to be holding up from our data, which is the Indeed hiring tracker. We've seen that manufacturing in the Jan-Feb-March quarter has seen a 39% increase, and primarily led by production manufacturing, sales going up and marketing roles going up. As we head into what looks like a slightly tight labor market in the US, what we've seen in the past has sort of helped hiring in India. It may not be very apparent or on your face, but I do expect that if the tightness in the US market continues, companies, the global capability centers will see some increase in hiring in India, and that might sort of bring up the numbers that we are seeing in the ITES sector, which has been impacted in the first half of this year. And also, there are significant investments in technology which the government is bringing in. And with that, there are many exciting possibilities for tech companies, specifically to make product, to make things work in India. And I do think that will help in contributing to hiring as well.
Okay. Just to get some clarity on that, Sashi, when you say manufacturing is still doing well, but as a share of the pie of manufacturing and services, isn't manufacturing significantly lower?
Significantly lower. Services, India continues to be a services dominated market, and that also reflects in the kind of jobs
In the context of your tracker, just to help us understand what that really means.
Also, in the context of a tracker, we're just talking about manufacturing and not in the context of the larger economy, including services.
Okay, and what about for services? What's that number for services in terms of demand?
Services, there has been a decline. I don't have the exact number by which it's declined, but definitely there's been a decline over the last couple.
Okay, but it would be safe to assume that services in general generate much, much more jobs than manufacturing, significantly more jobs.
Absolutely. I think
right. So that's important context when we're hearing that the manufacturing sector is doing better. Remember, the manufacturing sector is also getting more and more automated. This is not a sector where you need hands and legs and people beyond a point in large numbers. More efficient manufacturing units are those that use lesser number of people and more automation. Samir Parikh, just your outlook on India, something you started with. I know you're very optimistic, but which spaces do you think are going to be the most protected, I would say? In the last couple of years, I would say in the last 2.5 years, IT has been sort of the golden sector. Everything has been about IT, jobs, growth, boom, salaries. What is going to take the pole position this year?
One big correction on the number of US data. The S&P Global, although February data had 47.3, the manufacturing one increased in March to 49.3, and composite is 53.3. I stand corrected. It was not manufacturing. Composite PMI is 53.3, but manufacturing has also increased in March 2023. Okay, coming back to the India story. I say that starting with mobile and cell phone industry and the electronics industry to the whole electronic vehicle and mobility industry, I think there is a completely renewed, enthusiasm and a positive outlook there. I do see some challenge in edtech startups. There is no doubt about that, and it was to happen post-COVID when people started moving more towards offline and started realizing some of the challenges of virtual. That's where the edtech industry came under a lot of pressure. startups came under a lot of pressure. But rest of the things, and especially those who are in EV space and some of the other emerging sectors, can really see the boom time. In manufacturing, because of the whole China story also getting impacted and therefore a lot of diversion to India and other countries, I think India should be able to take more and more advantage of those industries. The whole development in electrical industry, for example, is very, very positive. And we do see some of the good, growth in both chemical and pharma industries. And I think India is also a very strong pharma hub. So we do see some positive outlook there. Of course, service sector, the entire raw material is people, and therefore the number of jobs in service sector, the actual quantum, the absolute numbers will always be more in service sector than manufacturing, and therefore the impact of layoff in service sector will be much higher on the overall employment market compared to the growth that we see in manufacturing sector still for hiring, because that cannot create those many jobs as service sector can create.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us as we try and break up what's happening in the whole layoff scenario. More and more headlines every day, but we have to understand that what's happening in India is going to be at a very, very different level and is in a wait and watch space. Thank you once again.